This is the Fashioning My Faith podcast for women by women. I'm Erica Cantrell, and again today we are blessed with the company of Alaina Stiles to finish off the second half, two more episodes, this one and the next, of our influencer series. And so today we're going to kind of bridge where we left off. So last time we talked about influencer and how we are influencers by things we do, and we don't always know the things we're doing that are influencing others. Today we're going to talk about a little play on words, influence her, and how sometimes we are being influenced without knowing it. And so the majority focus of today's lesson is going to be more on the negative influence things have on us. But Alaina's going to tell us a little bit about how throughout life we'll be faced with both positive and negative, and anywhere we go, it's going to be up to us as to what we find.
As college students and high school students even, we're surrounded by worldly things no matter where we're at. And for me, I'm at Freed Hardeman, and most people assume, oh, it's a Christian school, you're not going to find worldly things there. That is not true at all. Even though there are great people there are also people there that aren't there for the same reasons you are. And so it's just very important to find those great people and surround yourselves with them and not get caught up in the negative and the worldly people. Because if you do get caught up in those things, you're going to be influenced in a negative way.
And that's so true because, like I said, in previous episodes we've done together, I'm not at a Christian university, but it's up to me as to which crowds I find, just as my older sister, she went to Freed, and it was up to her as to which crowd she found. And so anywhere you go, you're going to have those choices to make as to what crowd you're going to seek out. And I want to give a little forewarning to any of our younger viewers who are still living at home. I struggled with understanding exactly what my parents meant when they give us those warnings of you're going to be whoever you hang around. And they were true and they were honest about it, but it's hard to wrap your head around until you see it in a sibling. So younger siblings can see it from their older siblings. You may see it in your friends or other people in your life. And for me, part of that was seeing my sister growing up. She acted like whoever she hung around. And that's where my parents mostly got that, was talking to her about. And she's grown, and I think she's seen some of those things that went on as well. But often the way she treated me as a sister was affected by the friends she was around and how they treated their siblings. And there were times where mom was like, Aaron, I know who you've been hanging out with because that's how they treat their sibling. That's how you're treating Erica. And I think we see that, and it's up to us to learn from it or to try to do better. And that's no hate to her. She's older now. This was when we were younger, but that's how important it is when we start thinking about our relationships and how we're being influenced without always understanding or seeing it. And so I want to encourage you as we get started thinking about that with Romans 12:2. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And so thinking about those influences and how we're being influenced, remember that when you look at yourself in the mirror every morning, every night, throughout the day, whenever you're doing that, try to remember and just self-check, self-examine, do I look like the world today? Whether it be with how we're being influenced clothing-wise. Sometimes our modesty slips because we're around more worldly dressing people. We want to look like them. We want to have that look. Sometimes it's how we're treating others. Did I snap at my parents today? Do my friends snap at their parents? Have that self-check of, do I look like the world today, or do I look like God today? Because Jesus is our example. We're supposed to be looking like a child of God and not like the world. So keep that in mind as we're talking today. We're going to have two big discussions, and then we'll have a small one with our closing thought. But let's go ahead and jump into our first one. In previous, I think one of our past episodes, we kind of did a online and in person. That's kind of how we're going to tackle this one. This first one's going to be more online entertainment, virtual type of influences. But let's start off with the thought, constant immorality will wear our spirituality down, and it will weaken our souls. So constant exposure to immoral things will wear us down without us knowing. And that's what this is all about, is without us knowing. Because sometimes it's easier to find it when we know, but when we don't know, that's when we slip. So we get into this mindset. A telltale sign of this wearing down is our mindset being things aren't as bad as other things. Something we're doing is not as bad as something someone else is doing. And I shared with you previously, I was talking to Alaina about this, the story in the past episodes about my coworker calling me out about singing a rap song, even though I wasn't saying bad words. That was my mindset. I had let the influences, and it honestly went back to high school basketball, those influences of the songs we listened to every day and the practice and games to hype us up. And my mindset was, I'm not as bad as someone who may be singing the cuss words. And we can't get into that because that's that wearing down of our mindset. And so, some different things that may expose us to this is rap music, sexual movies, TV shows, horror movies, TV shows, and social media are just a few of those online entertainment forms of constant immorality. And it will wear us down. For me, it's more horror shows and movies. I was watching a lot of horror movies in my transition from high school to college. And one night I told my boyfriend, I was like, I can't watch any more of these. I was like, I'm kind of getting depressed, and like you're fine until you wake up and you have this like distorted perception of reality and you find yourself like scared driving home. That's not what God wants us to have. That's not how God wants us to live. And so that constancy, consistency of those being around us is going to wear us down. So look with me at 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. It says, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. And so I'm going to let Alaina kind of tell us more about this and her perspective of negative influences.
I mean, like you said, just watching these things, hearing these things, being around these things, they're going to break us down, like you said. And eventually, these things could lead us to not purposefully, but maybe saying these things or thinking these things. So we just have to be cautious about what we watch, what we listen to, because even though we may not realize it, these things are breaking us down and pulling us further away from God.
And I like that you said that. In planning this episode, I didn't put the verse in, but you saying that triggered a thought. Um, God knows our thoughts continually. And so, even having the thoughts, like you said, that's a really good point, because if it wears us down, maybe we're not vocally saying it, but we're thinking it, that is still affecting our spirituality, because God knows our every thought. And so, moving on to our second part of our discussion, this is more of the in person. Um, the effect of friends, worldly friends, on our spiritual lives. And there are worldly people who are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. And some people not in the Church of Christ and are very strong religious people, more motivated than some Church of Christ Christians. But the ones who are not, they will affect our spiritual lives. They will wear us down just as much as the entertainment world will. Our friends can. And for me, a little story. Y'all know I love to share stories. And so I had two very close friends. We had a trio in high school, and both of them are a little more worldly. They don't go to the same type of church I do. Sometimes they don't go to church at all. And they're super nice people. They're nice friends. They loved me. They cared about me. But I struggled a lot towards the end of high school with sexual sins. And I know in the previous episodes I've alluded to, we'll dive in further in the dating episodes about that, and we will. But a little insight today is that I really struggled with that. I didn't struggle as much with drinking, although there were times where people were like, just drink it when I was at a friend's house, and didn't know the drinking was going to be there. But I was able to say no. It wasn't as big a temptation for me as sexual sins. And you confide in your friends. When you're closest to someone, you confide in them with your struggles. And I had told them I was struggling with it. Of course, them being in the world, they don't understand the position we have. And I was confiding in the wrong influences, the wrong role models. And their opinion on it was just go ahead and do it, get it out of the way. Like, you won't stress as much about it if you just do it. And that's not the advice I needed, but it was the advice that I surrounded myself with. And so that took a toll on me. And like I said, we'll go further in the dating episodes, but sometimes our slips in judgment, our sins come from that wearing down that happens when we surround ourselves with immorality. And so, Alaina, tell us a little bit more about that.
So, a saying that I've always heard is you are who you surround yourselves with or who you hang out with. And, if you're hanging around the wrong crowd, you're going to be influenced to do these worldly things, to drink, to have sex, to do drugs, all this stuff. You're going to be influenced. And even if you don't do those things, you're still going to look bad to other people because if you're hanging out with the wrong people, they're like, oh, she's hanging out with so and so. They do this, this, and this. That's going to make you look bad as a person, and you do not want that reputation as a Christian for sure. And it also looks like you support these things because you're hanging out with them and they're doing these things, so you're supporting them in doing that. And so we don't need to do that as Christians. So just always surround yourself with good people, good Christians who are going to get you to heaven. And if you are hanging around good Christians, you're going to be influenced to do good things and to grow stronger in your faith with God. And you're also going to look good to other people. And I know it's not always about looking good, but it is important to not have that bad reputation as a Christian. So
I think it goes back to, just like that was a phrase you heard a lot. I always heard my parents say guilty by association,
mm-hmm.
that even if you go to a party and you're not doing anything, you're still at that party.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, it looks like we're doing it even when we might not be. And it also affects our influence. Going back to that, we have to watch those things.
We just have to be cautious. And a verse that I want to share with y'all is Proverbs 13:20, and it says, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed." So that is literally saying if you're walking with the right people, you're going to be better off. You're going to be like on the right track to heaven. But if you're hanging out with the wrong people, you're going to go to hell. You're going to be destroyed. So.
And it's always going to be easier to be a good Christian when we're with other good Christians, people
Mm-hmm.
who don't tempt us, even if they don't mean it. Like I said, some worldly people are really nice and they don't understand because they're not in the church. They don't understand the things that they're doing that are hurting you. But we have to remember that it's going to be easier when we're around like-minded, faithful people. And so we've breezed right through this, but we're already at our closing thought. And so this part may be longer than our other parts, but I want you to think about closing out, thinking about the ways we might be influenced and not realizing it. Let's think about how can we guard ourselves, because we're not going to live in a world where we're never around worldly people. We're always going to be faced with those challenges. We're always going to have the devil knocking at our door and worldliness ready to creep in. Anytime we take space away from God, that's space for the world to come in. And so we have to be mindful of those things. And we need to ask ourselves, how can we guard ourselves? How can we keep ourselves from these things? And sometimes that is making sacrifices, whether it's in our relationships, whether it's in our friendships, maybe it's things that we do, activities we partake in. Those things can save our souls. It can make us live righteously without as much difficulty. There will always be difficulty, but making some of those sacrifices helps us to live righteously. And one for me is just, I remember telling my mom, I was graduating high school, and she said, okay, do you want to take a senior trip? We'll take you somewhere. We can go to the beach. And I was like, Mom, like, it's not really my thing. And she's like, when? Like, y'all used to love going to the beach. And I was like, I just don't enjoy it anymore. For me, that's a sacrifice I make because I know if I go, there's going to be everyone else there except for me wearing swimsuits. And that's hard for me. It's hard for me to feel comfortable somewhere where I'm uncomfortable. And it's not just wanting to dress that way, it's you're seeing that. Like the people around you there are all naked in the eyes of God. And we'll go into that in an episode on modesty, but just face value in this lesson, it's a sacrifice I make is not going to the beach, not going to places where there's a lot of swimming. If I'm going to go, I'm going to go with like-minded people. I'm going to be, maybe I'm just with other girls because we don't need to do a lot of mixed swimming anyways. But those sacrifices that are hard that people don't understand, people at work who've asked me about the beach, they don't understand why. They're like, well, just live your life. People there don't know you. That's not the same because we're still influencing people even if we don't know them. And so making those sacrifices, being the weirdo, being the freak, it's not fun, but it helps me. And you'll find things that you have to sacrifice that will help you. So, Alaina, tell us about some of the positives that can be viewed as negative by the world.
Right. I mean, making these sacrifices, people will look at you and say, what? Like, that's weird. Like, why are you doing that? But as Christians, we have to surround ourselves with other Christians who aren't afraid to express their beliefs. And for me personally, I am like best friends with my mom, and she's a great Christian example for me. And that's very important for me. And some worldly people might be like, you hang out with your mom? Like, that's weird, or you hang out with older Christian ladies? That's weird. But it's important to use those ladies as examples for us later on. And even like friends, like surround yourself with good Christian friends. That's very important. And I want to read a verse. It's Proverbs 27:17, and it says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. So this is just saying, if you're surrounding yourself with other good Christian people, you're going to become a stronger Christian. And so that's very important. And even though the world might view it as that's weird, and I mean, you still have to do this as a Christian. And it's just about making sacrifices, like you said. But it is also important not to completely shut these worldly people out of your life. You need to be there to teach them the truth, to teach them, hey, this is why we're doing this. This is why this is wrong in my eyes. This is why this is wrong in God's eyes. And you need to be there to support them. And going back to the last episode, talking about letting your light shine, in Matthew 5, verse 16, it says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So just shine in your light and show them what it is to be a good Christian is very important in guarding ourselves from the influences of the world.
And sometimes that's part of the sacrifice is putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable conversations that lets our light shine, but it's a sacrifice of not being comfortable and not just settling for, we just won't talk about God when I'm with this friend, because that's wrong. Like, we're called to let our light shine. Right. So we have to remember that that's part of the sacrifice, is having those uncomfortable conversations. And so just like Alaina said, we do not need to forget. We should never forget not to harden our hearts down or close ourselves off and forget to teach souls, because that's part of our main purpose here. Going back to the very first episode I did for this podcast was our purpose and why are we here. Part of that is teaching other people. If you'll remember, I used the phrase teach, preach, and reach. Teach, something to that effect. Teach, reach, preach. It was those three words, but that's part of our calling, is to teach others, to reach them, to preach to them. And we can't do that if we close ourselves down and forget to have those uncomfortable conversations. And so I want to share with you a verse, Romans 12:21. It says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And so this is a inspiring thing to remember, is that we have to overcome the evil with good. And I want to encourage you to do that. And I want to share with you final thought that I heard Mr. Don Blackwell use this phrase in a sermon. He was talking about homosexuality, but at the end he talked about this not shutting people out, not letting church become a country club where we're with our own people and sinners aren't allowed in. That's also against God's purpose for us. We need to remember, and I love how he phrased this, church is a hospital. And that is so real, because if we forget that our duty is to save souls and to help them, to be there for them, we are the nurses and the doctors in their soul's journey. We are there to fight, to defend, to save them from the illnesses and the death that sin brings. And so next time you're in a hospital, think about that. Think that I'm supposed to be there saving those sinners. And so we need to remember to do that. Church is a hospital. We're the nurses and doctors saving the souls. And so I want to thank you. I haven't seen the time, but I'm sure this went a lot quicker than our past ones. But it's a lot of information packed into a short amount of time. So just reflect on it, think on it. Remember back to have those daily self-examinations, self-checks in the mirror. How am I looking different from the world? How am I looking like the world? What can I do differently? What do I need to change? And make those sacrifices, make those Christian sacrifices to protect yourself, to guard yourself
Mhm.
from those negative influences. Thank you, ladies.